Today I'm going to tell the story of a guy. He believed in love, but one day everything fell apart in an instant. It's a story about how easy it is to lose something that seemed eternal. Perhaps in it you'll recognize not only his pain, but also your own fears. Let's begin. When I first met Aurora, her smile captured me at first sight. She was bright, witty, and there was something about her that made me forget everything around me. We met at a party at our mutual friend's house, the night when I finally decided that noisy events were not for me. But fate had it differently. Aurora wasn't like any other girl I'd ever met. She had a mystery and a quiet confidence that attracted me like a magnet. Our conversations flowed smoothly, as if we had known each other all our lives. We talked about everything: books, movies, music, even religion. Although our views on this last issue differed, it didn't seem important at first. We quickly became close, and our relationship began to grow rapidly. Aurora was from a family that placed great importance on tradition. Her parents were deeply religious, which played a central role in their lives. They raised their children in strict adherence to religious rules, and Aurora seemed devoted to these principles, though it didn't show much in her daily life. She never imposed her beliefs on me and respected mine, it seemed, just the same. Things were going well until it became clear that our relationship was getting serious. We had been dating for almost a year now, and talking about the future became a natural topic of discussion. But one day, on an ordinary evening when Aurora and I were sitting on her favorite couch, everything changed. "Aitan," she said, her voice sounding unexpectedly serious. "I want to talk to you about us." I turned to her, realizing that this conversation would be important. "Of course," I answered, trying to hide my excitement. "Is something wrong?" She sighed, and her eyes darkened for a moment. "You know that my parents, well, they have certain expectations about my future husband." I nodded, already anticipating where she was leading. "They've always told me that I should marry someone who shares our faith," she continued. "And frankly, it's not just their demands. It's important to me too, Aitan. I can't imagine my husband practicing another religion." My thoughts whirled in my head. This was not at all what I had expected. We had discussed religion before, and it always seemed like it wouldn't be a problem for us. We respected each other's differences, but now her words sounded like an ultimatum. "Do you want me to change my faith?" I asked, trying to make sense of her words. She lowered her eyes, unable to meet my gaze. "I can't do otherwise, Aitan. My family will never accept our relationship unless you share their faith." I felt my insides tighten. My heart beat faster and faster. It was a moment of truth. I loved Aurora, but I couldn't go against my beliefs. Religion had always been a deeply personal matter to me, and changing it for someone else, even for her, seemed impossible. "I can't do that," I finally answered, barely recognizing my voice. It sounded quiet, but firm. She looked up at me with eyes that held no pain or regret, just cold determination. "Then I don't know how we can go on from here," she said, with an indifference that pierced through me. Those words shattered my whole world. She was willing to walk away, to give up what we had for principles that I didn't think mattered to her. It seemed like she wasn't choosing us, but her family and their expectations. I sat in front of her, unable to say anything, unable to believe this was really happening. Aurora stood up and walked to her bedroom without turning around, leaving me alone. I didn't know what to do. All our conversations, all our plans for the future now seemed distant and unattainable. I was alone in a room filled with memories of our best moments, but now they seemed poisoned by her words. The night passed in restless thoughts and trying to figure out what to do next. How was it possible to go from happiness to the abyss so suddenly? But the main thing that kept me awake was her indifference. She didn't seem upset or distressed. Her decision was deliberate and clear, and I was just another detail that needed to be changed to keep her life in the right order. A few days had passed since that conversation, but the situation had not cleared up at all. Aurora acted as if nothing had happened. We met less and less often. Our conversations became short and dry, as if we had nothing more to discuss. It was unbearable. I waited for her to say something, for her to take the first step to make things right, but it didn't happen. I tried to understand her. I tried to explain to myself that her family was more important to her than anything else, that it was a choice she made for a reason. But every time I remembered our conversation, I felt a dull ache in my chest. It felt like a betrayal. Not because she was choosing her faith or her family, but because her words were full of cold indifference. The moment I told her I couldn't change my faith, I expected to see even the slightest glimmer of regret on her face. But there was none. Everything was easy for her. I couldn't stop thinking about how our relationship didn't matter to her as much as it did to me. It was killing me from the inside out. Every morning I woke up hoping I'd get a text from her, that she'd change her mind, but her phone was silent. Neither did she. At some point, I realized I couldn't go on like this. I had to make a change. I decided that I would talk to her again, that I would try to figure out why she had made this decision. Maybe we could find a compromise. Maybe we could do something to keep our love alive. I didn't want to believe it was over. That evening I dialed her number. She answered on the third dial tone, her voice as calm and indifferent as before. "Hi," I said, trying to hide my excitement. "We need to talk." "Okay," she answered with a touch of boredom. "When?" "Tonight. I can come over." "Okay, come by at 7. Her voice sounded like we were discussing meeting a friend, not our relationship. That bothered me. I felt like this conversation wasn't going to accomplish what I wanted, but I was still hopeful. When I pulled up to her house, my hands were shaking. I tried to calm down, assuring myself that everything would work out. We'd been through too much together to just walk away. Aurora would open her eyes and realize that our relationship was more important than other people's expectations. I knocked on the door, and she opened it almost immediately. She was wearing casual jeans and a loose t-shirt, as if she hadn't prepared for a serious conversation at all. She didn't even smile when she saw me. "Hi," she said briefly and invited me in. We sat down on the couch and there was silence in the room. I didn't know where to start. I looked at her, trying to find a hint of intimacy in her eyes, but her gaze was cold and distant. "I've been thinking," I finally began, "about our conversation, and I can't just let it go. I can't believe you're really ready to give up on our relationship because of religion. We can find a solution. We can work through this somehow." She sighed, as if my confession had bored her. "Eitan, I thought you would have realized by now. This isn't just a whim of mine. My family will never accept our relationship unless you change your beliefs. That's not something I can change. And if you're not willing to take that step, there's no future for us." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I stared at her and couldn't believe she was saying it so calmly, as if she were talking about something mundane. She didn't seem to care that our relationship was falling apart right now. "But isn't our relationship more important?" I asked, my tone escalating. "We've been together for a year, Aurora. Are you really willing to give up everything for some rules that other people made up?" She looked at me with the same cold determination. "Those rules are part of my life, Eitan. They're important to me and my family. I can't live my life at odds with them." In that moment, I realized that we were truly standing on different shores. Her world and my principles would never come together. But what struck me most was her indifference. She didn't seem upset, didn't seem to care in the slightest. I felt anger building up inside me, mixed with pain. I loved her, was willing to fight for our relationship, and she just seemed to be waiting for the moment to put a stop to it. "So that's it?" I asked in desperation. "You're just going to walk away?" She shrugged. "I don't see any other way out if you can't accept my faith." Those words broke me completely. I wanted to respond, to say something that would make her understand how I felt, but my mind was blank. All I could do was get up and leave. Get out of her house, out of her life. I walked outside, feeling my legs grow absorbent cotton. My chest burned empty, and the only thought in my head was, she left me. Everything I'd believed in, everything I'd built with her, had crumbled in a matter of minutes. Her indifference hurt me more than the fact of the breakup. It seemed that I had never mattered to her, that my feelings were nothing compared to her beliefs. I sat in the car, clutching the steering wheel to my knuckles, and realized that her choice had been made, and there was no place for me in that choice. When I got home from that meeting with Aurora, there was a strange, unfamiliar emptiness that enveloped me. There was no anger, no fear, not even despair, just silence. It was as if my emotions had just frozen, as if I'd stopped feeling anything at all. I sat in the darkness of my apartment staring out the empty window, trying to realize what had happened. She was gone. And now I had to get used to life without her. A week went by. She didn't write me, she didn't call me, and I didn't try to get in touch with her. Every day when I woke up, I expected this pain, this feeling of loneliness to finally go away, but it only got worse. My whole life used to revolve around her. Even the most ordinary moments of the day, a walk in the park, dinner after work, now seemed meaningless without her. Everything I did reminded me of Aurora. I could go to our favorite restaurant, and every little thing, the menu, the familiar waitress, even the smell, everything reminded me that the place was now empty without her presence. My friends began to notice that something was wrong with me. One by one, they wrote or called, trying to find out what was wrong, but I didn't want to talk about it. I couldn't talk about how the woman I loved had left me because I refused to betray my beliefs. It seemed too personal, too painful to share it with anyone else. Even to my best friend Alex, who was always there for me in difficult moments, I couldn't say it. Every time he called, I found excuses not to meet up. But the truth was, I was broken. A real storm was raging inside me and I didn't know how to deal with it. Aurora had chosen her family, chosen her faith, and I was left with nothing. I realized I could never change myself for her, but that didn't ease the pain. One thing tormented me. Why was it so easy for her? Why was her choice so clear-cut, while I tossed and turned in bed every night, unable to find a place for myself? A couple times I'd even thought about just texting her, telling her I was sorry, that I was ready to discuss things again, to find a compromise. But every time I picked up the phone, I was stopped by her coldness. I remembered the look in her eyes that night, her calm, almost indifferent expression. She had already made her choice, and that choice was not in my favor. The days passed slowly. I did my work on automatic, not feeling the slightest desire to put any effort into it. My colleagues also noticed the change, but they didn't ask questions, realizing that I wasn't ready to discuss my problems. Even ordinary meetings with friends after work now seemed unnecessary. I refused all offers, preferring to spend the evening alone, immersed in my thoughts and memories. One day when I woke up in the morning, I realized that I couldn't go on like this. I had to move forward somehow, to try to start a new life without her. But how to do that? How do you forget the person who occupied your heart when every corner of the city, every little thing in the house reminded you of her? I decided to leave town for a while. It was the only way to try to escape from everything that surrounded me. The memories wouldn't let go of me here, and I hoped that a change of scenery would help me sort myself out. I took a leave of absence from work, packed a suitcase, and left for a few weeks in the mountains where I planned to spend time alone. The drive to the rented cabin took several hours, and the whole time I was silent, staring out the car window at the rapidly changing scenery. The farther I drove away from the city, the more I felt like I was really running away. But this was not the kind of victory one could dream of. I realized I was just trying to hide from my pain, not solve the problem. The cabin I rented stood in a quiet place surrounded by woods. There was no connection to the outside world, which seemed perfect for me. I wanted silence. I wanted to be alone with my thoughts. The first few days were spent thinking and taking long walks in the forest. I tried to make sense of everything that had happened. I asked myself the same questions. What would have happened if I had changed my faith? Was it worth it? And every time the answer was the same. I couldn't live with myself if I took that step. But that didn't lessen the pain of the loss. One morning when I woke up and opened my eyes, I was suddenly overcome with the distinct feeling that Aurora had never loved me the way I loved her. This thought had been lingering in my mind for a long time. There were so many moments in our past that now seemed suspicious to me. Her constant attachment to her family, her unwillingness to discuss certain issues, her indifference to what was important to me. I began to remember every moment of our relationship and realized that maybe I had been too blind to notice the truth. Maybe I had always come second to her. Family came first. Their opinions, their faith, their traditions. I was just a temporary part of her life until the moment of choice came. And when that moment came, she chose them without hesitation. It was painful to realize, but every day I became more and more convinced that it was true. A few weeks passed and I began to feel something in me change. The pain was still there, but it no longer seemed all-consuming. I began to accept the fact that our relationship with Aurora was doomed from the beginning. Our worlds were too different, and perhaps I was naive to hope that we could bring them together. On the last day before I returned home, I sat on the porch of my cabin, looking out at the setting sun, and I suddenly felt lightheaded. Not that I was relieved that she was gone, but I realized that I no longer held a grudge against her. Aurora had made her choice, and I had made mine. We both did what we thought was right, and even though I lost her, I kept myself. When I returned home, it seemed like an eternity had passed since I left. The city greeted me with its usual hustle and bustle, but I felt something had changed inside me. The old pain was gone. That sharp wound that had tormented me was now more like a dull but deep emptiness. The memories of my relationship with Aurora still haunted me, but they no longer had the power to shatter my world. I began to rebuild my life piece by piece. I started going to work again, socializing with my friends, sometimes even agreeing to see them. They noticed that I had changed, but no longer tried to find out what had happened. Perhaps they were alarmed by my indifference to what was happening. I tried not to dwell on my memories and tried to focus on the present. But despite my attempts to move forward, the thought of Aurora still lingered. There was a feeling inside that something was left unfinished, that I hadn't fully accepted her passing. Every time I passed the places that reminded me of our moments together, I felt the same emptiness, but without anger or resentment. It was like accepting the inevitable. She was gone, and now I had to learn to live without her. But every day I felt more and more strongly that something important was lost forever, and it would never come back. One such evening, as I was walking around the city trying to find some new foothold, I suddenly came across the old park that Aurora and I had gone to when we first started dating. It had been our sanctuary, a place where we could talk about the future for hours, laugh, and just enjoy each other. Now, however, the place seemed dark and alien to me. I sat down on one of the benches where she and I had once sat and leaned forward, wrapping my arms around my head. Scraps of the days when we'd been happy together flashed before my eyes. I tried to figure out exactly where things had gone wrong, but I couldn't find the answer. Maybe our paths had led in different directions from the beginning, and I'd been too blinded by love to notice. The park was empty, silent, broken only by the slight rustle of leaves. At that moment, I realized it was time to let her go. But no matter how hard I tried to convince myself, my heart resisted. It wasn't easy to let go of someone you loved with all your heart, knowing they would never come back. As the days went by, I found myself sinking deeper and deeper into my work to avoid thinking about the past. Work became my only salvation, allowing me to forget for a while. But even that couldn't completely drown out the emptiness inside. Colleagues noticed that I became less talkative, more withdrawn, but no one tried to get into my soul. They saw that I needed time and left me alone. A few times Alex tried to drag me out to a party or just to dinner, but I refused. It was hard for me to be in noisy company where everyone seemed happy and carefree. My pain was too personal to share with anyone, even close friends. I started staying home more often, avoiding talking and meeting people. But one evening when I came home after another long day at work, a letter appeared in my mailbox. It was addressed to me, but I didn't recognize the handwriting right away. When I opened it, I saw that it was from Aurora. My heart sank as I began to read her words. Eitan, I've been thinking for a long time about whether I should write to you, but I realize that I need to do it. I don't know how you are right now, but I would like you to know that I don't regret anything. I made a choice and it was the right one for me, but I realized that I hurt you. You may think I acted cold and callous, but I didn't. I just couldn't have acted any other way. Aurora. I reread the letter several times, not believing she had written it. Her words were calm, like herself, but I sensed there was something more behind it. Perhaps it was her way of saying a final goodbye, closing a chapter of our story. But something about this letter felt unspoken to me, as if she had left a door behind her that I could no longer open. Her plea to forgive her echoed in my head. Could I do that? Could I just let her go and move on as she suggested? The answer wasn't so simple. I sat with the letter in my hands for a long time, staring into the void, trying to make sense of myself. I wanted to forgive her. I wanted to let her go. But that emptiness inside still held me in its shackles. The letter was the last reminder that we would never be together again. It closed doors, but it didn't open new ones. I felt like I was in a vacuum, where the past continued to haunt me, and the future remained vague and uncertain. Several days passed after receiving the letter, but I felt no relief. On the contrary, it intensified my inner struggle. It seemed as if the whole world now revolved around this void that was left after her departure. I tried to force myself to move on with my life, but thoughts of Aurora wouldn't let me go. Her image was still with me, reminding me of what we had lost. Every day I felt more and more strongly that this story couldn't just end. Something was breaking inside of me and I didn't know how to fix it. My heart was still with her, and despite her words of forgiveness and moving on, I couldn't just accept it and leave her in the past. I felt like her leaving was the end of not only our relationship, but something bigger, a part of myself. After Aurora's letter, I couldn't find peace for a long time. Every word she said seemed simple and logical, but behind it was a weight I couldn't shake off. She wrote that she didn't regret her decision, and yet she asked for forgiveness. It was a strange combination. She said she did the right thing, but still wanted me to forgive her. And me? I couldn't understand how I felt. Forgiveness meant letting go, and I wasn't ready for that. The letter, instead of closing an old chapter, only opened a new wound. Aurora remained a part of me, and though I tried to fight the feeling, it grew like a snowball. I reread her letter over and over again, trying to pick out every emotion, every hidden subtext, trying to figure out what she really meant. But there were no answers. She was already out of my life, and I was still clinging to the ghost of our love. Several months had passed since the day I received her letter. Outwardly, my life was slowly returning to normal. I started spending more time with my friends again, though I still found it hard to fully open up to them. Alex kept calling me for meetings, and one day, unable to stand his insistence, I agreed. He and I met at a coffee shop we hadn't been to in months, and the conversation slowly turned to what had been going on with me lately. "Are you still thinking about her?" Alex asked when the conversation turned to my condition. I looked away, realizing it was one of those questions I didn't want to answer. "Yeah, I think about it. All the time," I admitted honestly, for the first time in a while. It was a strange feeling to say it out loud. It was as if my thoughts had become tangible, and that brought with it some relief. Alex nodded, and in his eyes I saw understanding, but also a slight worry. "You have to move on somehow, Ethan. She's already made her choice. You know that yourself. There's nothing you can change." His words sounded so simple and true that something inside me flipped. He was right. All this time I kept hoping that something would change, that she would change her mind or come back. But she didn't. She was gone forever, and the sooner I accepted that, the better for me. But accepting it was harder than I thought. When I got home that evening, I felt again the emptiness that had settled inside me after she left. The forgiveness she asked for was impossible for me. I couldn't forgive her because I couldn't forget her. I couldn't forget her indifference. I couldn't forgive the fact that my love was less important to her than the demands of her family. It was a heavy weight, and it continued to weigh on me, preventing me from moving forward. One evening, I decided to go through some old photos. On my phone, I had tons of pictures of Aurora. Happy moments, smiles, trips. Every frame was soaked with memories of us, of being us. I stared at those pictures for a long time, and the pain that had faded away over the past few months flared up inside. I realized I was still clinging to the past, to the days we'd been together. Sitting on the floor of my apartment surrounded by the digital ghosts of the past, I asked myself the question, why can't I let go? After all, Aurora made her choice a long time ago. She's moved on. And me? Why do I continue to suffer? The answer came all by itself. I couldn't let her go, not because I didn't want to, but because I hadn't yet figured out how to live without her. My whole life for the past few years had been built around her, and now that she was gone, I had lost my bearings. I found myself alone with my pain and didn't know what to do next. In an attempt to find some relief, I started thinking about what she had written to me, her plea to forgive her. The words seemed so simple, but they carried depth. Perhaps Aurora realized that I couldn't do that so easily. Perhaps it was her way of shutting our relationship down without looking back. One night, after a few sleepless hours, I sat down at my desk and decided to write her back. I didn't know if I would ever send this letter, but I needed to speak up. Aurora, you wrote that you don't regret your choice, and I respect that. I realize that your family and faith were most important to you, but that doesn't make my journey any less difficult. It's hard for me to accept what happened. Yes, you asked me to forgive you, but you don't even realize how hard it is for me. You chose your faith, your family, and you left me with nothing. You say I deserve to be happy, but how can I be happy if my whole life fell apart the day you left? I'm trying to move on, but I don't know how. Forgiveness is not something that comes at the snap of your fingers. It's a long process, and I'm not sure I'll ever be able to forgive you completely. You ask me not to hold a grudge against you, but I can't promise that. I'm trying, I really am. But every time I think about us, the same thing pops into my head. Why did you give up on me so easily? Why didn't I come first? Just know one thing. Despite all this, I wish you happiness. I hope your life will be what you want it to be. But I'm not sure I can say the same for myself. Perhaps one day, I will find my way. But for now, I am lost. Eitan. I reread that letter several times. It was frank and honest, perhaps too honest. But I needed to do it to make some sense of my feelings. In the end, I decided not to send it. This letter was for me, not for her. Her world was already built, and mine was still in ruins. As the weeks went by, I struggled to find the strength to move on. I realized that forgiveness isn't something to do for the sake of another person. Forgiveness is what I need to find my peace. But so far, I couldn't find it. I was haunted by the thought that I was replaceable, that the love I thought was eternal was too weak in the face of family and faith. These thoughts became unbearable, and I began to feel like I was stuck in this void forever. So much time had passed, but I still couldn't get over her. Every morning I woke up thinking about her. Every night I fell asleep with her image before my eyes. Another endless day came, and I felt something inside me breaking. The letter from Aurora lay on my desk, a reminder of the past that keeps me stuck. I could have hidden it or burned it, but that wouldn't have changed anything. It wasn't just paper. It was a symbol of all the pain I continued to carry inside me. But on this day, something was different. Maybe it was the fatigue from the constant thinking. Maybe it was the need to find a way out. But for the first time in a long time, I felt the urge to do something to shed that weight. I decided to meet her parents. The idea seemed crazy. Why would I want to meet the people who had essentially caused our separation? But the more I thought about it, the clearer it became that I needed closure. Not for them, but for myself. I realized that I held a grudge not only against Aurora, but against her family as well. They had played their part, and I couldn't just ignore that fact. Perhaps meeting with them would give me a chance to speak up, to get answers, or at least the clarity I'd been missing. I didn't immediately decide to text them. I typed the message several times and deleted it, not knowing how to word my request properly. Finally, I just wrote, "Hi, I would like to meet and talk. This is important to me, Ethan." I wasn't expecting a quick response, and in a way I hoped they would ignore my message. But a couple hours later came a reply from her mother. "Come by tomorrow at 5. We're home." My heart clenched. I knew this step could be painful, but something inside told me it had to be done. The next day, I walked up to their house feeling uncomfortable. This place where I had once been as a welcome guest now felt foreign and hostile to me. I stood in front of the door hesitating, and only after taking a deep breath did I knock. The door was opened by her mother, Mrs. Roberts, the same woman who had always been polite but cold to me. There wasn't an ounce of surprise in her gaze, as if she knew I was coming. "Hello, Ethan. "Come on in," she said dryly and gestured toward the living room. I stepped into the house where everything was still the same as I remembered it. There was the same heavy atmosphere of expectation and discontent in the air. Already seated in the living room was Mr. Roberts, a stern and imposing man who had never hidden his disapproval of our relationship with Aurora. "Sit down," he mumbled without further greeting, pointing to the chair opposite. I sat down and felt small and weak under their stares. We were silent for a few minutes before I decided to start talking. "I didn't come here to accuse you. I came because I want to understand why things happened the way they did," I began, trying to sound confident, but my voice was still shaking. Mrs. Roberts looked at her husband, then at me, and her face remained impenetrable. "You knew from the beginning that our family held strict beliefs," she began calmly. "We never hid that from Aurora, and you knew too that a relationship with her would have its own terms." "I knew," I replied quietly, struggling to contain my emotions. "But I didn't think it would be more important to her than our love." Mr. Roberts finally spoke. "You're a good guy, Ethan, but you weren't right for our daughter. Your faith, your lifestyle, it was all too far away from what was important to us and to her. We believed she would make the right choice, and she did." The words, "the right choice," echoed in me. It was like a confirmation of all my worst fears. She had chosen them. I heard that cold, detached tone again, the one that had no room for love. But what about her feelings? Didn't that matter to you? I couldn't hold back any longer, and my words came out with muffled desperation. "Aurora always knew that family came first for her," Mrs. Roberts continued. "And when it came time to choose, she did what she had to do. It wasn't an easy decision for her, but she knew it was for the best." "For her or for you?" I blurted out, but immediately regretted it. Mr. Roberts frowned, and a shadow of irritation flashed in his eyes. "We didn't force her. It was her choice, Ethan," he replied, emphasizing each word. This conversation wasn't giving me the answers I'd hoped for. I had come here hoping to understand what had happened, but instead I heard what I feared most. Her choice was indeed a conscious one, and I was just in the background. We talked some more for a while, but I wasn't listening to them anymore. Everything was raging inside, anger, pain, and frustration all mingling into a single stream. The conversation didn't make me feel any better, but it made me realize one thing. I couldn't cling to this story anymore. Aurora had made her choice. Her parents weren't monsters as I had thought in moments of anger. This was simply their reality, and they couldn't have done otherwise. But now I knew I couldn't change the past. As I walked out of their house, the cold fall darkness enveloped me. The air was saturated with moisture, and the sky was covered with clouds that heralded rain. I stopped in front of the door and looked back at the house. It no longer seemed as ominous as it had before. It was just a place where people with different values and beliefs lived. I realized that there was nothing more for me to do here. My life would continue onward, but without Aurora and without these people. The forgiveness she wrote about in her letter didn't seem so important to me anymore. I no longer felt I had to forgive anyone. It was her choice, and I needed to accept that and move forward. It had been months since I had last seen Aurora's parents. Time hadn't healed the wounds, but it had allowed me to move with inertia. Work and daily chores became my main companions in this gray, empty life. Sometimes I thought I might learn to live with this pain as an integral part of myself, but every night I returned to the same thing. Thoughts of Aurora. I tried to avoid mentioning her, but the more time passed, the more often I thought of her. Occasionally I would intercept myself from looking at her pictures on social media, but every time I did, my heart clenched in pain. I continued to see her choice as a betrayal, but deep down I realized that it was her life and she was entitled to her decisions. One evening, Alex came over to my place unexpectedly. He rarely came unannounced, and his face looked tense. When he sat down across from me, I sensed he was about to share some important news. "Ethan, there's something I need to tell you," he began without raising his eyes. I nodded silently, waiting to hear what he had to say. "I've been seeing Jason," he said, finally looking up. I didn't immediately realize who it was, but then I remembered that the name had come up once in conversations about Aurora's new life. It was her future husband. "Jason?" I repeated, feeling something inside clench. You mean that Jason guy? Yeah, he's an acquaintance of mine from college. We've crossed paths a few times, and he invited me to a party recently. Alex continued, sinking into his memories. My mind whirled with thoughts. I didn't know how to react. Jason was from the same sphere as me, but I never paid attention to him until he became a part of Aurora's life. And how is he? At first glance, not a bad guy. Confident, successful, good sense of humor, Alex said, pausing. But then I found out something. I knew it was that something that interested me the most, so I forced myself to listen to him further. What exactly? He says he wasn't religious, but for Aurora's sake, he's willing to embrace their traditions. He has some sort of plan for how he's going to please her parents and make them accept him. He doesn't seem to mind following their beliefs at all, Alex said, his voice slowly losing confidence. Alex's words hit me like a lightning strike. I couldn't believe that someone could change so easily for love. Wait, you mean he's going to accept their faith? I asked, not believing my ears. That's exactly right. He says he thinks it's important to their relationship. Whatever it is, he wants her to be happy, Alex replied, and his words felt like they were cutting me apart. I felt anger building up in my chest. This guy I didn't even know had gotten something I cared so much about. He was able to adjust to their terms while I stubbornly stood my ground. I never thought I'd change my beliefs for someone, but now that I'd heard how easy it was to do so, all my pride was starting to crack at the seams. How can he even do that? I muttered through gritted teeth. He can't just pick up and abandon his beliefs. It's wrong. Ethan, everyone has their own path. Maybe it's not as important to him as it is to you, Alex said, but his words weren't helping. I could feel the rage building up inside of me. Why had Aurora chosen him? Why didn't she do what he did? I could have tried, could have changed my views to be with her, but I didn't. Our conversation continued, but I wasn't listening anymore. A storm was raging inside me that flooded all logical thought. How dare he change his beliefs so easily for a woman? How can he be confident when he himself doesn't know what it means to be a believer? That night, when Alex left, I was left alone with thoughts that would not give me peace. My whole inner world seemed shattered. I lay on the couch, looking up at the ceiling and remembering the days when Aurora and I had dreamed of a future together. Now it all seemed so distant and unattainable. How could Aurora have forgotten what we had? I started asking myself questions again that I didn't know the answers to. Why hadn't I done the same? Why hadn't I been able to embrace their traditions like Jason had? I felt like I couldn't live with that thought anymore. I needed to change something, but what? Every night I ran this situation over and over in my head, asking myself the same questions over and over again. Every day it got harder and harder,